So, any questions about what we did last week? Anything? Any questions regarding theories? Systemic and non-systemic, post-systemic theories? Everything is fine. I am assuming that you are taking your IR theory course, or if you're outside the department, you will actually ask me when you have questions, okay? I'm not delving too much into the theories. And that's because I'm going to do something more fun. Starting from today, we're actually getting to inside that yin-yang picture, remember? There was the state and there are several other actors in international system. So I'm going to start with the state today. Sprout is what you're supposed to read for this week. And he talks about the modern state and also alternatives to the modern state. Because the main argument here is that modern state was just one available alternative, and there were others as well, okay? So we did not have to, the international system did not have to develop into a modern state system, but it did. So I'm just going to talk about why the evolution took place in that particular way, and why not other forms did not become today's political organizations. Now, we have to first talk about what a state is, what a modern state is, what a sovereign state is. And once we do that, we're going to compare it with an alternative, which was feudalism in Western Europe. And then we're going to talk about alternatives such as multiple forms of political organization that existed in the world. And then we're going to talk about alternatives such as empires. Why don't we have empires today? Why don't we have city leagues? There were city leagues such as the Hanseatic League in the Baltic region. So why not develop into a city league system all over the world instead of a nation state system? Why not develop into city-states? Because there were city-states such as Genoa and other Italian city-states, right? Why not follow their example and become and evolve into a completely different international system? So if these are questions that you've never thought about, you're going to start thinking about these questions. Why is it? Why are things the way they are now in terms of political organization? Why do we have Turkey? Why do we have the United States or Denmark instead of, or Australia, instead of different structures of political organizations? That's our topic, okay? This is probably a mix of history, political science, international relations, psychology, economics. You're going to basically have all of it in this course from now on, okay? Because these are the kinds of questions that we will be asking. And finally, Sprout says that the nation state, the modern state, got a victory. And that's why we're going to look at the causes of this victory, okay? Having said that, I want you to take a look at this map. If our computer lets us open it, let's say, here. Okay, good. There's this neat website that I found online, Euratlas. And here you can actually find Europe in all these different time periods. So I want you to just look at this for a while. I know you can't see the details from the back, but that's okay. There are, okay, what year is this? Let me see. I want to take you to 1200s. Go as early as 1200s. This is what Europe looks like. There's no Ottoman Empire here yet, yes. There is Roman Empire, right? The Eastern Roman Empire. There's New Armenia, there's Rome here. Here's the Black Sea. There's Bulgarians, and there is Venice and Papal States here. There are islands here, okay, Castile and Portugal, Aragon, Navarre, Leon. Have you ever heard of these? Probably not, okay? You haven't because there are no nation states yet, but there are many different types of political organizations, such as city-states, just cities, leagues and all. There's France, and then there's Holy Roman Empire. Remember in the historical background we talked about Holy Roman Empire? So Germany is pretty much the strongest part of that. And then there is Greater Poland, Masovia, Lesser Poland, Galicia, and you have Pinsk, Polotsk, Sudovians. There are all kinds of things that we have not actually seen before, right? So all these entities, well, of course there's England here. All these entities look like this in 1200. I want you to notice the changes. By 1300s, here's what it looks like. There's more in writings, right? That means some of these entities split, right? So we don't actually have the same entities that we had 100 years ago. They're splits. It looks quite messy, doesn't it? It actually looks very messy at this point. And then we will have a look at 1400s. Look, it's less messy. Somehow, it's not as messy as it was in 1300s because the map is, well, the borders are constantly changing, okay? Why? We're going to get to that, but I just want you to first see. Here's what happened 100 years later, okay? Still messy, but not as messy as it was in 1300s. By 1600s, you actually have quite a few empires. For that reason, it looks much less messy here. You have Ottoman Empire there. Look, Ottoman Empire goes all the way up here. You have Habsburg Empire, right? You no longer have the Holy Roman Empire. And you have France here, Spain here, England here. Does this actually remind you all these things that I told you about how these states started a struggle of power in 1500s and 1600s? Okay, now they're turning into empires. But here, you still have the remnants of the Holy Roman Empire. It's not as big as it was before. So you have quite a messiness here in that part. And also you have still city-states there. And then look at 1700s, what's going to happen? Much better, but the empires still are there. And by 1800s, whoa, you have a huge difference. Right there in the map, you can see it, okay? So the Holy Roman Empire is becoming more structured. France, Spain, England. Did you notice that Scotland was separate? Now it's not. And you have Portugal. Well, Portugal is not that big. It's not that strong by 1800s anyways. Ottoman Empire is right there. And it's actually not as big as it was in the other map. And then it lost territories. And then, look at this. This is 1900. There you go. You actually have a unified nation state of Germany, a unified Italy. But before Germany was unified, you know, there were cities and leagues in that region. And then you don't have a city league anymore. You have states in the Baltics as well. And then you have Serbia, Bulgaria, Romania. Then you have Austria-Hungary Empire, Ottoman Empire. About 20, 30 years after that, actually 18 years after that, you're going to lose the empires from the map completely, and then there will be only nation states left. Here is the year 2000. It's a little messier again, isn't it? There are more in the map again. Now that's because for a while the empires actually take care of the messiness, and then once the empires collapse, it will be several nation states. And by 1950s, when the colonies and all become independent, the number of nation states will increase. The last time I looked, we had over 190 nation states in the world today. Okay? So the international system has changed a lot, guys. The map shows you that there are times of messiness, and then there's times of more organized, larger units. But the fact is, the system today didn't have to be as it is now. There could be many alternatives. The empires could have survived, or it could be a messier system with all the little city-states and leagues and all that, and empires and nation states, just a mix. It's not, though. Now, why is that? That's pretty much what we're doing this week. Okay. Euratlas, if you Google it as Euratlas, you'll be able to see this. Oh, I actually was kind enough to put the website here, the URL here. Okay. Now the definition, oh, I have fancy stuff going on there. Okay. The definition of a nation state. Now, I want you to remember this person, Max Weber, because he actually talks about, he's a German sociologist who talks about the state and what a state is and what a state, nation state should look like, okay? And he does that as early as, he lived from 1864 to 1920, and he did this as early as the beginning of the 20th century. Now that means he lives at a time that people are still trying to decide what a nation state is. Remember, there are still empires, right? So he's talking about the nation state and what a modern state should actually look like. See, so this guy is kind of ahead of his time, actually, and he's talking about a human community that successfully claims a monopoly of legitimate use of physical force within a given area. This is the definition. Now, I want you to remember the main characteristics of the definition. You know why? Because until you start thinking about the definition, it looks like just an easy definition, but it's not, okay? Let's just look into it. A human community, so people, actually individuals, live in a nation state according to Max Weber. But an individual and the way an individual thinks and lives is different than the way an individual lives in a community, right? So he emphasizes community. And he says that an individual living in the society with a group of people will get into a contract, which is going to be one side of the contract will be the state, and the other is going to be the individual, right? And in that contract, there is a claim of monopoly of legitimate use of physical force. What does that mean? What kind of physical force are we talking about? Military? Not only military, but also what? Placing punishment. Okay. Who places punishment? Where do we go? Courts. Okay, we go to courts. And also, is it just the military that can use physical force in a state? Police, right? Police forces Well, in the case of Turkey, Jandarma is also an institution that can use force. But so we're talking about a monopoly of security forces, right, within a state. Now, let me ask you a question. Do we always have the state or the state security forces that have monopoly on physical force? Or is he actually talking about an ideal nation state? He's talking about an ideal nation state, right? So actually, there are people who have licensed guns, so they have physical force in the society. And there are states that have armed groups such as the PKK in Turkey, right? When there are terrorist attacks in a country, then you have other groups that have that also have use of physical force. So at this day and age, can we argue that there is a monopoly of power? What's that?
The monopoly is about legitimate use.
Okay. So legitimate use of physical force is the key to understanding what Max Weber is talking about, right? What's legitimacy? Am I legitimate here? Yes. Why?
Because we accept your authority.
Okay. You accept my authority. Okay. Why do you accept my authority?
There's a social contract here. We come here to be taught, and therefore we have.
Okay. So who's giving me this authority?
University and us.
Okay, not only the university, but also you, right? Because you're enrolling in the course, you're actually legitimizing my presence. You're actually making my world completely different than it would be otherwise. Imagine that no one enrolled in the course. Would I then be legitimately teaching a course called the International System, IR347? So if you didn't exist, the course wouldn't exist, the state wouldn't exist. So the people living in the state actually are the ones that are legitimizing the use of physical force. Okay? That makes the difference, that is the difference between any armed group or any armed individual and the state. Okay? So what else about state that this definition gives us? A state controls territory. So without territory, the state does not exist. Okay? That's why there's all this fighting between Palestine and Israel, right? Because they are fighting for territory. Both are fighting for territory. Both do not want to give up the territory that is shared. And so without this classroom, where would I teach? I need the classroom. In the beginning of the semester, we changed the classroom, right? Because our current territory at the time was not sufficient for us because we had more people in the class. We were aggressive in the sense that we asked for a new classroom. So territory is, it's possible to actually expand territory. Okay, so state is an entity where it is based on a territory that can be expanded through wars, right? So people actually fight to expand their territory. Now that actually is another aspect of why you need security forces. So you need security forces not only inside the state, but also to protect the state from outside coercion. Okay, coercion. You can think of coercion as force. So you're actually, as the state, you are actually trying to control your own citizens, and the citizens actually give you the right to control them. Well, you enrolled in the course. You didn't have to. But you gave the right to me, the ruler, so that I can do what is best for you. Do you realize that? Have you ever viewed it from that perspective? Okay. So my taking attendance is a nuisance for the students, but at the same time, the state is trying to protect the citizens from even themselves. Now, this is a very debatable point here, okay? So how much of a power should be instated in the state itself? Can the state try to protect its citizens from themselves? Okay, that's debatable. And Weber has led to several debates on this. How much should I be protecting you? What would be a counter argument to my taking attendance? Oh, that reminds me. So what's the counter argument? I just told you that it's good for you to come to class as the citizens of this state. I'm the legitimate force, right? And I said, okay, I'm actually going to use this to enforce that policy. So I'm trying to protect you from going to the cafe and having a chat with your friend in the class hour. I'm protecting you from you. Do I have the right to do that? You're our hero. Okay, I'm your hero. Thank you. How would you argue against that?
Well, Locke would argue that the source of your authority is us, and therefore your power should only exist to serve our interests. And if our interest at any particular time is to not be in class, then therefore your power is legitimate in the moment you enforce the contract.
You might argue that. That day, not coming to class was the best interest for you, was in your best interest. And so by forcing you to come to class that day at that particular hour, I am violating what's best for you. That might be an objection, right? So guys, being a state or establishing a state, remaining as a state, is quite a cumbersome thing, because people always have argued that states are too powerful and states are not always to the benefit of its citizens. So there's several arguments. Well, I'm just going to show you that with all these arguments, we need to look at the alternatives, okay? What could have happened instead of states? Would it be better in terms of these objections to the state with the alternatives? Now, I want to talk a little bit more about external coercion. What is external coercion? State possesses coercion-wielding organizations. For internal coercion, states use police forces, but we don't really send the police forces outside, right? Except for special operations or something. We have military for external coercion. So force, having a coercive force, physical force, is quite an important aspect of this definition. So if there is anyone who will object to having military force, sorry, the definition of state pretty much inherently has this need for physical force. Now, is there an assumption here in this definition? Is Weber assuming a certain kind of international system when he defines the state as a place that physical force is central to keeping the entity in a given area? Is he a realist? Or is he assuming a world that is quite full of struggle? Well, the liberals assume that too, though, right? The liberals also believe that the world is full of struggles and the world system is anarchical. So he could be a realist or a liberal, we don't know. But there is definitely some kind of an assumption that the state has to defend itself, right? So the state can actually be attacked from other states. Hey, he's writing at a time that he has seen wars, right? And he has actually seen Europe, the situation in Europe. And he has thought about these matters, and he concluded that, well, there's this constant struggle, and nation states actually have to give some struggle to become nation states. For that reason, it's important to have some kind of monopoly of legitimate use of physical force, okay? So I want you to consider the circumstances of the time that these guys, these thinkers, these philosophers or historians or sociologists, IR scholars are writing, okay? You can never separate the argument from the reality of the time. So Weber comes up with this definition because he's living at a time that slowly all these states are becoming nation states, and they all want to be militarily powerful. One more thing, you were saying courts. So, okay, going back to the class example, if there is a problem between you guys, what do we do? Resolve it. Who's going to resolve it? You would go to court. Okay. So in that sense, I would actually, let's just say you want the exam multiple choice, and you want the exam long essay. Okay. No student wants that, right? Okay. There's that dispute. And in that dispute, there needs to be a mechanism. If this is a legitimate state, there needs to be a mechanism that will decide on what to do with the dispute, okay? So in states, courts are serving that purpose. And laws, actually, right? Every state has its own law system, and the law system serves for that. By the way, you were a law student, right? Yeah. That's why you said courts first. Okay, so in that sense, the best thing for me to do if this was a state is to pick Orkun, Tülay, and a couple other, Burak and a couple other people as the people who will form the court, and then the issue would go there, okay? And even another thing that I could do is to have a referendum, and so everyone will vote for multiple choice or essays. So in that sense, if this is a state, especially if this is a democratic state, I could have gone for a referendum. But even for a non-democratic state, I could go for a referendum again, but you would know what my preference is, and not to piss me off, you would still pick the long essay one, okay? So it doesn't matter, the regime of the state doesn't really matter. What matters is the state has its own mechanisms to legitimize itself, okay? And legitimation is in that sense very significant. Oh, there you go. One more aspect. State is a permanent organization. Here's a good reason why I cannot be a state here. The issue here is, guys, okay, next semester, none of us will be here. So I cannot actually declare my statehood, unfortunately, because this is not a permanent organization. The state then aims to be permanent in a sense that unless it is conquered by another state, it remains, okay? It's not a temporary organization. One more thing, the courts should be permanent, and the police force should be permanent, the military should be permanent. I would expect you to ask me, if you don't have a military, aren't you a state? Really? What was Japan until very recently?
Sitting duck.
Sitting duck. Okay, very realist perspective. This ban, it's military, yes.
But there is a difference between Japan and Sweden. Sweden is protected by NATO soldiers.
Okay.
Japan is protected by USA.
Okay, so from 1945 until quite recently, Japan was not allowed to have its own military. That was one of the things that was agreed upon after the end of the Second World War. Now, Kıvanç said Japan was then a sitting duck because without the military, that's what you become. But in the meantime, Japan had alliances strong enough to protect it if there was a war. Okay, so Max Weber probably could not imagine a state could be without a good military. But guys, as I said, the realities of the time and the spirit of the time changes. Okay, so after the Second World War, it was normal. It was the stipulation for Japan to survive. Was not to have a military of its own, okay? And in 1800s, that was probably something that could not even be imagined. Okay. So if the definition of state is clear, I come up with a huge revised definition of the nation state, a definition that is more adapted to our times, okay, to modern times. A state is a territorially defined, permanent political organization designed to regulate political and economic competition. Aha. That other definition did not say anything about economy, did it? We have the students from economics, right? Who was, okay. You're from the economics department. Why didn't you say anything about economy? A state actually exists to a certain extent, not only to provide security to its citizens, but also to provide property for its, or to protect property for its citizens, right? Okay. So I want the economics students to bring in the variable of economy anytime you feel that should be there, okay? So here, guys, in this definition, we don't only have political competition. Now, let's assume that someone else is competing with me to rule the state. That would be a political competition. But when the economic competition among yourselves is in question, I would have to have some type of regulation, some laws, and also courts again to worry about that. Let's just assume that Magnus is paying Akbel to make notes in class. That's why she sits there and you sit in the behind row. And so you have this deal between yourself, okay? And in this deal, if you don't get your money from him tomorrow, you're going to get very upset because he offered you money and you're writing everything that I say. Now, in a situation like that, who are you going to go to?
The teacher.
To me, and I'm going to say that you should go to the courts. And once again, just like the dispute that you guys had, in this economic dispute, there will be courts, okay? And this is part of the definition of state. It is a very important part of it that Max Weber actually did not emphasize in his definition. Between individuals and other entities. Why did I write other entities here? Who are other entities than the individuals? Yes. Corporations, organizations, NGOs, non-governmental organizations. I don't know. 3 of you got together and now you have an organization. You have a IR347 Greenpeace organization. And you come to me and say, you're not doing enough for the environment. We're against, all these horrible policies that you have for the environment. and you say, you spend too much electricity, then I might decide to turn some of the electricity off.
There's their electricity. You should turn their electricity off.
I should turn off their electricity? Oh, that's very evil. The state can't do that. The state is supposed to provide for all its citizens, right? Okay. So it's not just the individuals then, but also other entities living within certain borders. Now, the state has a special coercive status. So the state actually can enforce its laws by using coercive power, both domestically and across its borders when it decides to defend itself, or actually when it decides to conquer other states as well. So here, is there anything that does not really fit in the reality of today? This is a definition from a few years ago, and now I realize something, actually. Anything, any objections? I have an objection to my own definition. Any objections? Is it a perfect definition? Tülay.
Maybe about the law, enforcing laws only domestically, maybe even some of its law be international.
Okay, thank you. That's it. Turkey has installed European Union harmonization laws after its candidacy, acceptance of its candidacy in 1999. So from 2001 on, there have been several laws that were changed in the harmonization program. Now, what does that mean? That means some of Turkey's actions are actually no longer in Turkey's control, such as when there is banning of political parties. Turkey has banned political parties in the past and might still in the future. And all these decisions might be taken to the European Court, and Turkey has to abide by these rulings. Okay? But interestingly, sometimes the European Court supported Turkey for banning some of the parties that it did, so there wasn't any problem there. But if that was not true, then Turkey would actually lose credentials for the EU, and it would be criticized in EU progression reports. I should say it is criticized in EU progression reports, okay? So we're actually talking about erosion in something. What is that something? Sovereignty, right? So states, this definition shows that states are sovereign. I have weird animations today. I don't know why. I don't know why it happened that way. Okay. So there is erosion of sovereignty. People like Krasner, Cohen actually talk about sovereignty a lot in international relations. And sovereignty is about deciding, very simply, deciding what to do in your territory, enforcing your own authority in your own territory, and also to be able to say no to the things to the demands that are coming from outside. So I own my own business in my own territory, and no outside power can actually have a say in this, is what I would simply put sovereignty. Okay, but if you want a fancy definition, it's right there. Supreme decision-making and decision-enforcing authority resides in the state and no other social institution. In my case, let's go back to me. Am I sovereign? I am not fully sovereign, really. You know why? Okay, yes. Wouldn't it be nice if we said, okay, I'm just going to do the class for 2 hours today, this week, and I'm not going to do the third hour? Okay, that would not really be possible because the university regulates that we're going to have 3 hours a week. Okay, that's it. So sovereignty in this state of Nishatana goes as long as the rules and regulations of the university starts. So there is a higher organization, so my sovereignty actually erodes to a large extent. Let me tell you something. My father actually tells me that the professors were very sovereign. They had their own state in their classrooms, not permanent though, but they were very sovereign. Sometimes they would send their assistants to teach the course. They wouldn't even bother coming to class. My father actually went to law school in Istanbul. And so he would argue that the professors had their own republics, their own sovereign states at the time. Now, compare that to the situation of the professors today, and you can actually see erosion. You can understand erosion of sovereignty in that terms, okay? So in the international system, states were more valuing their sovereignty about 50 years ago more than they do today. Because now you have states who want to be a member of the EU. If you want to be a member of the EU, you will abide by the rules of the EU, okay? And also, let's not just limit this to EU. How about the UN? Does UN actually limit your sovereignty at all? Ideally, it does. Okay, ideally, it's supposed to. When there's a resolution, ideally, the country that resolution addresses should abide by the resolution. But sometimes they don't, so there are sanctions, right? Economic sanctions or military sanctions, all that, yes.
In my opinion, UN is not a fair organization.
Is not what? Is not a fair organization. Okay, fair in terms of what?
In terms of
Okay, so from a realist perspective, you can argue that, and you last week, haven't you proved that you are a realist? From a realist perspective, yes, actually, the UN favors the powerful states because of the permanent five. Because in the UN, the permanent five actually are stronger or more equal than the other states. Right? So as long as there is a permanent five in the Security Council, the realists would argue that this is not a fair thing. And actually, this is a power struggle between major powers, which is natural. Because according to the realist theory, power struggle is quite natural. Yes? Mm-hmm.
If you want to be a member of the five permanent, you should go there.
Well, realism would never recommend going to a war, but realism would say, try to increase your power so that you can become a permanent six. And Germany actually wants to be in that permanent five, and from a realist perspective, that's okay. Increase your power level. Well, you will increase your power level if you want to be permanent six. Okay. Then let's take a break and come back in 10 minutes.